Boss insisted I work in the office today. My boss and I had a disagreement about working from home this week. The office is in San Francisco. I live in the East Bay and need to cross the Bay Bridge to get to work. We had an important presentation scheduled today. I wanted to do it virtual because the APEC meeting is in SF this week and everything seems disrupted. President Biden and Chinese President Xi are here. It's a 2-hour commute on a typical day and I told my boss it might not be feasible to come in this week. He insisted I come in. So I said okay, but don't blame me if I get stuck in traffic. We had a pretty heated discussion about it. So today there's a huge backup on every freeway toward the Bay Bridge because protesters have chained themselves across all 5 lanes. The bridge is completely closed. Now the boss wants me to do the presentation virtual, but I told him I can't. I'm stuck in traffic. I can't operate my vehicle and do the presentation. You will have to do it without me, but he isn't really qualified. Boss wants to cut off all employees and workers from their email access over the weekend but doesn't understand the consequences. Hello everyone. This is my first post here and wanted to share my greatest work story. My native language isn't English, so please excuse when my grammar is a bit simple. X200B. The story starts with me and my company. I'm a 30-year-old businesswoman who works in an IT service in a bank space. I'm the girl for everything basically, but I'm a specialist for first-level support, administration and backup, sometimes even networking. Even when I'm not head of my IT department, I'm basically had all the responsibilities of them, but unfortunately my pay grade doesn't reflect it at all. I think of my boss of my IT department as kinda lazy if not incompetent. He even brags about getting so much money for basically doing nothing. I have a 40-hour week, but since the whole IT department is my responsibility I need to keep track of the servers and maybe problems that can occur 24/7. This is mostly done via emails. When the server status gives out a warning or a failure, I will get notified, and then I'm fixing the problem over remote desktop or going to the company itself even in my free time. I wouldn't mind this, but I'm not getting paid for this. But on the other hand, I'm getting punished when something is going wrong. My boss's boss wasn't that much better. Since it was a fancy bank, everyone should be in a suit the whole time, to let it look professional, best with a skirt and high heels. Only problem is when you work in the first level support you need to do a lot of behind the scenes work, like slipping under the desk to do a repair, cable management, doing work on the server rack and doing lots of other activities that makes you dirty. You can imagine that this worn out my business clothes really fast, and not only that, they were so impractical and really made my work harder. So I changed my clothes to a comfy hoodie and work pants to fit the work I'm doing a bit better. When my boss saw me, he was furious, demanded I can't look like a poor hobo inside his bank. I told him that I demand work clothes for both occasions because they are expensive and get worn out quickly. He refused, and I wasn't really happy about this. X200B. So much for the introduction. X200B. Someday, my boss's boss, head of the whole company, called me. He had a plan. He wanted to create quiet hours, means he didn't want his employees working on weekends to let them rest properly. At first glance, you could say hey, that's a nice idea. Yeah. No, he just didn't like to pay them for overwork, because he got in some legal trouble with overwork paying in general. Not only that, some employees have strict deadlines and need the extra time to get work done. To actively ensure nobody can't work over the weekend, he wanted the following: please make sure no one can access their emails and remote desktop over the weekend, no exceptions. Since we had a ticket system and be able to attach emails to tickets, I asked him to write an official work task. This has 2 reasons. First, I like everything documented. Second, I have something to protect and secure myself if the task I was giving is incorrect. And it's exactly this that saved me. So I was in my office desk again, thinking how to get the task done and what implication it will have, and then it was clear to me what it meant. The email came from my boss with the task, and indeed he wrote for everyone, no exceptions. I was thinking to myself, should I write them? The implications it would have? After thinking, I thought of how I am treated as a worker and I decided against it. X200B. I was working immediately at this task and made an automated process to block every access to emails after Friday 6 p.m. to Monday 6 a.m. X200B. Weekend came, and it was Saturday, and I was calm, relaxed, because if you have not noticed by now, by cutting down everyone's emails, means of course that I don't receive any updates on the servers. I can't possibly work on it because my remote access is also cut. Of course, if you think you could forward your work email address to your private address, no, I can't, because we have a very strict data protection. Nothing is allowed to go out. I'm happy. It's still Saturday, middle of the day. I'm cooking myself and my husband a nice meal and my telephone rings. It's my boss's boss. He talks with a stressed voice and told me that he can't access his emails. I needed a second to process this, but I responded, that doesn't surprise me at all. Since you ordered me to cut everyone's email access, without exceptions. He was angry, very angry, and told me that this obviously doesn't count for him. I told him that he specifically told me that there are no exceptions, and he stated everyone. He then argued that this wasn't how he phrased it, so I reread him his own email. After that, he was silent for a moment. He noticed his flaw in his logic. I broke the silence and asked him, "Sir, if you still want access to your emails on the weekend, that's no problem. Please send me a request per email and I work on first thing on Monday." A bit angry again, he replied that he wants to have it done immediately, and I calmly explained to him that I can't do this, since my remote access is also blocked, like he ordered. He hanged up. 10 minutes later, he calls me again. He asks me calmly if I can fix the problem right now when he pays me for my overwork. He also wants me to be available at any time means I should receive my emails and be able to remote work and that this will raise my pay grade by a lot. I thought that this is the perfect opportunity. I agree to that condition and pay raise, but only when my coworkers and I finally get work close. He agreed. Since then my work situation drastically improved and mostly only because I maliciously complied, well aware of the consequences of the given task. X200B Thanks for reading. X200B Edit Thank you so much for all your comments and love, I'm glad you liked it. Edit 2 I want to add something here to the 4 types of comments. To the people with positive comments and their own stories, thank you so much. I had no idea this would blow up this much. To the people who complain about my English, yes, I'm German, not a native speaker. I'm giving my best here and I'm trying to improve on it every day. That's all I can do. To the people with hateful comments, if you don't like it, that's totally fine, but there's no need of sharing insults, really. In my honest opinion, it was a valuable lesson for my boss to let them have a well-though concept before giving the official task. To the people who don't believe and say it's bullshit, I'm not here to convince you. If I can reach even one person to empower them to improve their work condition, then that's a complete win in my eyes. I can't take notes on my computer? Fine, I'll use a typewriter. So, some backstory. I have a Spanish teacher that absolutely doesn't allow us students to take notes on our computers because we will use them to play games. She has told us we need to take notes on paper, but didn't say with a pen. So I decided to do something I have wanted to do for a long time. You see, I collect typewriters, so I decided to simply use one of those. So a few weeks ago I walked into class and pulled out this beast of a machine, Lectra 860. The teacher was shocked and annoyed, but when I told her we were allowed to take notes on paper, she actually let me use it. So I suppose it had a happy ending for everyone other than mine and my classmates' eardrums. And lucky me, after bringing it to class a total of 7 times and taking very loud notes, we are now allowed to take notes on computers. If you're late to school, you get half an hour of detention. This policy was enacted by my high school in my last few years. Once classes started, the gates were shut, and if you arrived late, you had to sign in at the office. This gave them a list of kids to pick out at the end of the day, and we would have to sit in detention for half an hour. But it was only ever half an hour no matter how late you were. Cue me and my best friend enjoying our extended lions in the morning, then walking into town to hit up McDonald's or Subway for breakfast, before casually strolling in between 2 and 3 hours late, signing in, and just happily accepting the extra half an hour detention at the end of the day. It took them a full month to catch on to us, at which point the late policy was changed and we were given a full week's worth of detention each, which A, absolutely did not make up for the time lost, and B, was well worth it for the best month of high school we'd ever had. It's safe to say the 2 rebel teenagers won that round. Manager kept forgetting my break. I worked in a cafeteria on campus at my university. It was wonderful because I could take shifts around lectures and didn't lose time traveling. The manager used to sit in her office on the phone or just disappear for long periods of time. I didn't mind because I liked my other coworkers and she left us alone to do our thing. I always volunteered to do the closing shift because the owner let me take home all the leftover food. It basically kept me and my housemates alive and we were very grateful. The problem was, on a 5-hour or longer shift, you had to take a 30-minute break. I'd always ask when mine was, but she'd always say later, "We're too busy." I'd usually end up just working the whole 5 hours. I didn't mind until I realized she was only paying me for 4.5. I asked her about it and she said if I didn't take my breaks that wasn't her problem. Cue malicious compliance. My next closing shift was 4.5 hours of opening hours and finished 30 minutes after closing. Everyone else went at 7 and I stayed back by myself to clean everything in 30 minutes. It was a big job but I had it down pat. The entire shift I kept asking her if I could take my break and she kept saying no. So, at 7, I took my apron off and walked out, saying I'll be taking my break now since we were too busy before. I sat in the cafeteria and watched her clean that entire place. It took her well over an hour. The next day she had a break schedule up. My wife wanted clarity, but I provided aesthetic instead. In the same form as this rather iconic post, "Never touch your truck again?" You got it, neighbor. I posted this on the IDA sub, but many people were saying it is MC and to post it here too. I 59M live in a major city in Ontario, Canada. I live in a small subdivision and have 5 neighbors total on my street. For the past few years during the winter when we're getting a lot of snow or a bad storms, as I'm leaving for my overnight shift at around 8-9 p.m. I'll put my wife's windshield wipers up on her car and do a quick walk around to my other 5 neighbors and put their windshield wipers up on their cars, obviously not if they're outside or something, but if it looks like they're in for the night. Many of them forget to do this, as many of them have children and it typically slips their mind, and their wipers will be frozen to their car in the morning. It's just something nice I like to do to look out for my neighbors. They're all always grateful of this and thank me for it. Many of them started doing it too, and there will be nights where I'll forget to put mine and my wife's up, and in the morning one of the neighbors has done it for us. Anyway, recently one of our neighbors moved and a new family moved in as of last week. It's a young couple and their 2 young children. The other night I was leaving for my overnight shift at around 9 p.m. It was snowing really heavy and we were supposed to be getting almost 30 centimeters of snow and it was freezing out. So I put my wife's wipers up and do my usual quick walk around to the other neighbors. I was hesitant when I reached my new neighbor's house, as I've only introduced myself once, but did it anyway. As I was putting the second wiper up on their pickup truck, the husband came charging out of his front door yelling, "Hey, what the FCK are you doing to my truck?" I tried to explain to him I was just putting his wipers up to help him. He continued to scream at me to get the hell off my property and don't touch my shit again. The wife then came out and started yelling at me too. I apologized and started walking away. Some of my other neighbors heard the commotion and came outside to see what was happening. They tried explaining to him too that it's just something we do. Both of them wasn't having it. Fast forward to this morning. I'm arriving home from my overnight shift and as I'm walking in I see the wife of this couple struggling outside to break the ice off the windshield wipers of the truck. Guess she was trying to take her kids to school and the wipers were frozen solid on the car. She sees me and yells over, "Hey there, do you mind giving me a hand please?" I look over to her and yell back, "No sorry. Thought I was to never touch your shit again ma'am," and walked back inside. She yelled back at me, "Wow." Told my wife about this. She thinks I should have helped her because she was just trying to get her kids to school. I disagree as I was just following what they told me. Pay me 3 hours to save you 39 cents? Deal. For background, it's important to know that when I travel for work, I can charge at most 8 hours even if the travel day is longer, but if it's not an 8-hour travel day I'm expected to log in and work up to 8. Super fair as. Additionally, the travel booking tool flags your ticket and notifies your manager if it deems your selected flight is not the cheapest reasonable option. I've never actually had a manager decline one of my choices, but the system was so dumb this time I invoked MC. Instead of a 2.75-hour non-stop home, the system told me I should take the lower cost one stop, at a travel time of 5.75 hours, with a savings of 39 cents. Instead of getting more work done, I got paid an extra 3 hours to watch some extra shows on my iPad and had an extra meal on the company travel allowance at the airport, which was around $30 value. Delicious compliance. So sue me. Really? This happened several years ago. I was working 40 hours week programming at my main job, but I did occasional small projects in the evenings and on weekends for other clients. At one point I was referred to a large company that runs major stadiums and event venues around the country. One of their stadiums is relatively close to where I live. I'll just call them Mark 1 for this story. The saga begins. This manager at Mark 1 said they wanted simple administration database and user interface for employee timekeeping. Apparently the old system they had was not working for them. I got details of what they wanted and drafted a set of specifications. Told them I could write the system to the specs for $2,000 flat rate. They agreed. I immediately went to work and churned out a database and UI for the system with full documentation in about 2 weeks. So I scheduled an in-person meeting to show them. Now when I showed up at the meeting, someone representing the security department was there, and he asked about getting some additional features. Sure, I told him, I can do that. So I went back, wrote up a change request and incorporated the additional features into the platform. I scheduled another meeting with Mark 1 for a couple of days later. When I got to that meeting I noticed the audience had grown. There were 2 extra people from the finance department. "Can you add feature X, feature Y and feature Z?" they asked. Sure, no problem. So I left, wrote up a CR and added the features. A few days later I met with them again. Imagine my surprise when the audience size had grown, and the new attendees asked for more features. This went on for about 5 more rounds, and I was getting frustrated that I had spec'd out a 2-week project that was now taking months, and I wouldn't be paid until I delivered and they accepted the final product. but I chugged along implementing all their change requests. But one day the Mark 1 manager called me. Apparently she had been speaking with other departments that weren't represented in her status meetings of ever-increasing mess. She gave me a list of dozens of new features they wanted, some of which would require a complete redesign of the core database and an overhaul of the UI. I had had enough. I told her this is a complete overhaul of the original spec. I'll have to redesign and rebuild this from the ground up. Well, that's not my problem, she responded. Well, actually it is. I'm not going to design and build an entirely new system until you pay me for the current one, built to the specs we agreed on. After a short pause, she dropped on me. Well, we're not going to renegotiate. You can consider this project cancelled. That's not how this works. You still have to pay me for the work I've done. No, I don't. You haven't delivered anything. Sue me. And she hung up. Cue the malicious compliance. Meet me at the courthouse. I took Mark 1 manager's advice and went to the next day to file in small claims court to recover $2,000 from Mark 1. On my court date a couple of months later, I went down to the courthouse and was greeted by an arbitrator. In my state, they have court-appointed arbitrators meet the litigants when they arrive, to see if the parties can sort out the case with an agreement to maximize the judge's time. The arbitrator asked me, is there anything you would agree to resolve this immediately? About it, and said if they'll pay me $91,800 right now, I'll drop the suit. He then went into a side room where Mark 1 manager and the corporate lawyer were hanging out. I heard her screaming that they would either pay it all or pay zero. The arbitrator came to me with the news, and I told him I heard, and I'm happy to take it all. He left and said no, they want to go to trial. Fast forward a couple of hours. Fast forward is a funny phrase, considering how slow the court moved. But hey, and we're standing in front of the judge. I'm at my table alone, and the Mark 1 manager and lawyer are standing at the opposite table. The judge asked Mark 1 manager to tell her side first. She went into a very long speech about the project and corporate America and apple pie and thermonuclear weapons, and honestly I have no idea because I stopped listening about 28 minutes ago. She talked non-stop for at least 30 minutes. Then the judge asked me for my story. Now I wasn't maliciously ignoring Mark 1 manager's long-winded tale of political intrigue and patriotism. I was actually formulating a strategy. I thought to myself, the judge probably had people who liked to speechify in front of him all day every day. I also thought he might appreciate a short and sweet story that got straight to the point and didn't waste his time. So I said, Your Honor, they agreed to pay me $2,000 to design and build a software system for them. I completed the work based on the agreed specs and then they decided to cancel the project after I was done. That was it. Then the judge asked me, how do I know you did the work? I printed out the specs, change requests, documentation, and source code the night before. I lifted a ream of paper 500 pages from my table and offered it to the bailiff. Here's the code I wrote for them, Your Honor. The bailiff came to take it from me and waved him off. No need. I can see it from here. The judge then asked Mark 1 manager looked like she was in a daze. Ooh, yes. Then I fined for the plaintiff in the amount of $2,000. FCKU, pay me. About a month later, Mark 1 still hadn't paid. So I called the county sheriff and explained, sent him the court judgment documents, and he said no problem, they'll pay. The sheriff actually called me later that day. He was on his cell phone and I could hear him talking to the Mark 1 manager. He told her, cut a check for $2,000 right now or he was going to rip your computers out of the wall and auction them off until the judgment is satisfied. I don't know if he had that authority, but the sheriff seemed to have a grudge against Mark 1, and he was reveling in the opportunity to dog them out. Apparently Mark 1 believed he had the authority because, long story short, the sheriff had a $2,000 check in his hand about 15 minutes later and it was in my mailbox about a week later. Take my time over breakfast? Okay, many years ago, I used to work for a SMB managed service provider as a repair technician in London. I was repairing desktops, laptops and printers. It's pointless trying to drive in central London, so the company would reimburse us for our monthly public transport ticket. As a result of this, we couldn't really carry spare parts with us like the guys with company cars elsewhere in the country, so they would get delivered to site. The usual routine was go to the office in the morning and collect the parts for the first call, then ask the store's clerk to arrange delivery of the rest of my day's calls to site, in a set order. This would be the order that I had already planned to attend to travel for the day, so the parts would get there before me and I could crack on with the first one whilst they were being delivered. I'd usually be on site for the first one by 0930 and would frequently manage 6-7 repairs per day. Obviously this would depend on how much travel was involved, but all the techs would divvy up the calls first thing in the morning so that none of us were running around the city too much, and we were mostly based around one area for the day. We each had regular clients where we'd often go 2 or 3 times per week and knew the IT teams involved. Anyway, the MSP gets bought by a bigger MSP. We're told not to worry, I know, right? And that nothing would be changing, as we were one of the most productive regions in the business. And for a bit, it was everything as normal. Then the manager announces that he's leaving. I bumped into him about a year later, at random, and he said that this was due to politics. A new golden boy manager is parachuted in from UpNerd to transform us. Apparently, we might be the most productive team, but we weren't the most profitable. He devises several methods to decrease costs and raise profitability. First off is the closure of the office and relocation of the stores to somewhere central. This is basically the other end of the country, so shipping has to be done the night before. Us techs are none too happy about this. Second, he wants us all to use our own cars. He can't force this, as the travel ticket is written into our contracts, and he can only change the contract with our agreement. To a man, we say no. What he can do is change the shipping routine. The new process is that parts will be delivered to a commercial locker at locations in the city, and we have to go and pick the parts up before heading to our first call. QMC. We are well aware of the performance of the new owner's chosen shipping company and usually reserve them the nickname UK Fail, as they never seem to hit service level agreement. Further, the lockers are located in various strange locations on the street, petrol stations, random courier offices. Kind of like how Amazon lockers are now, but without the nice paint jobs or electronic entry. They have no way to keep tabs on who is where, or collecting what, aside from calling us. Anyway, there's a quick get-together and we agree that, as the GB hasn't deigned to help us and isn't hiring replacements for those who left, we aren't obligated to help him. The plan is no one is to attend a locker until 10:30. Which is the SLA for parts delivery. No one is to carry more than 1 bag of parts. If you have to do multiple trips to a locker, so be it. No one is to pick up any slack for anyone else. Answer calls for help if someone is in trouble though. Do what you have been assigned, if possible, and never call in to say that you have finished all your calls for the day. Anything that gets left over, gets left. If you get assigned an emergency call, some clients had SLAs that required a tech on site in a given time, usually 4 hours. Go there and wait for parts as usual. Communicate this to any new hires during their training days. Productivity plummets. GB calls meetings and generally loses it, but hey, we're just following his procedure, right? Within 12 months GB is gone and the new guy has the sense to ask us what would be a better way to run things. That one time my son was sent home because of dress code violation at school. When my son was in middle school, I was notified he had to be picked up because he was in violation of the school dress code. I asked what the issue was and on the phone was told he's wearing a shirt that shows nudity. I freak out and rush to the school, my mind worrying as to what he possibly could have worn. None of his clothes that I knew of had nudity on it. As he gets in the car, I see violation. He wore a t-shirt with Bruce Lee on it from Enter the Dragon. When I got home, I called to confirm this was why they sent him home. Sure enough, a topless Bruce Lee's bare chest sent someone clutching their pearls. Apparently, a quick stop to the craft store followed. Using puffy paint, I superimposed a lovely bikini top to cover Bruce's man nipples. He wore the shirt to school again and nobody dared say a thing. Lol. The time I was a victim of malicious compliance, and it still makes me laugh. About 30 years ago I was an admin and facilities manager of a Royal Mail sorting office, and one day every one of the liquid soap dispensers in the toilet was empty, so I found a passing cleaner and told him. Not my job, that's the night cleaner's job to fill them up. Yeah, well, he obviously didn't do it, so you need to go to the cleaning cupboard, get some soap and make sure there's some in each one of the dispensers so people can wash their hands. I go back upstairs to my ivory tower, and 5 minutes later I get a phone call to say I need to sort out the liquid soap dispensers in the toilet. Go back downstairs, and in each liquid soap dispenser there's a bar of solid soap. Upload everything to SharePoint? You got it. A number of years back I worked for a company that was on a company-wide migration of most Office documents to SharePoint. It worked great for things like shared documents, sheets, contracts, but our department worked with large datasets. You can see where this is going. One day the project manager of one of the projects I was on asked me via email to upload everything I had on the project to SharePoint. This is a real pain because there's tons of files, and I'd rather not. Everything? Are you absolutely sure? There's a lot. He was sure. He wanted everything. So everything he got. Many thousands of data files, terabytes worth of stuff. I get a frantic call from IT. It wasn't meant for this. I tell them to talk to the project manager. They ask why and I just forward his email with the instruction to upload everything. Minutes later a company-wide email goes out saying SharePoint is for documents and spreadsheets only. What bald spots? Hoa got on us for bald spots in our yard. Now they are considered Halloween graves. All we needed were dollar store tombstones. By the time the 20 days after a holiday rule kicks in for decorations, the grass seed would have sprouted through the soil. Update: I found a loophole. I planted bluebonnet seeds, the state flower, with the grass seed. We are required to mow our lawns with the exception bluebonnets present. It's the only weed they would permit. Come spring we are going to be the Lil House on the Prairie. When you get our envelope in the mail, will you send in a contribution? I just received a phone call from a telemarketer purporting to be a charity, which I doubt, but I stayed on the line and listened. I'm retired, and not very busy this morning. Pretty quickly they ask, when you get our in the mail, will you send in a contribution? Yes, I replied, and promptly disconnected the call. I doubt they have my address, so I probably won't get an envelope. But for that minute they had me on the line. They weren't talking to someone else. X200B. Why did they get in for free? Let me fix that. I used to work as a bouncer doorman at a bar that charged a $2 cover on weekend nights. Everyone paid to get in with only one exception: party buses. We had an agreement with the different party bus operators that if they brought their groups to our bar they would get in for free. Lively crowds are good for business, so one night I'm working and a guy comes in with his girlfriend and I tell him it's $2 a head. He grumbles about it and I give him the same line I tell anyone who complains: a $2 cover is the cheapest thing you will buy here tonight. If you can't afford it you might want to go somewhere else. He doesn't want to look cheap in front of his lady, so of course he pays. A couple minutes later he's back saying he just talked to some people who didn't have to pay, and wants to know why he got singled out. I tell him about the party bus rule and say those people must have come in on a bus. He motions towards some people sitting with his girlfriend and tells me, you didn't charge my friends, and they didn't come on a bus. I recognized the people, and when they came in I asked them if they were from the bus, and they had said yes. So they lied to me. It happens and normally I wouldn't worry about it. I tell him, well, it sounds like I made a mistake. I guess it's their lucky night. That's my hint to him that he should let it go. That's not good enough for him. He gets louder and keeps demanding I refund his $4 to keep things fair. I've had it with him. I tell him, you're right. It's not fair. Let me fix it for you. He smirks because he thinks he's getting a refund, but he doesn't realize all I'm giving is some sweet MC. His smirk disappeared when I stepped away from the cash drawer and walked over to where his friends were sitting. In my most polite voice I said, hey, sorry to bother you guys, but there's a $2 cover tonight and your friend here told me you didn't pay. I must have misheard you when I asked if you were with the party bus, but I need to collect the cover from you now. The looks of betrayal they gave him were priceless. I collected their covers, smiled and loudly thanked him for being so honest. Then I walked back to my post and watched them proceed to rip him a new one.